My roommate was normal, until I found what was under his bed. I didn't know how bad it would get when I first moved in. Freshman year, first time living away from home. It should have been exciting. New place, new experiences, new people. I had been nervous about getting a random roommate, but I figured it couldn't be that bad. Worst case scenario, I'd just keep to myself and deal with it. His name was Ethan. Quiet, clean, polite. The kind of guy who barely spoke unless he had to. Honestly, I was relieved. I had heard horror stories about nightmare roommates, loud, messy, obnoxious. But Ethan wasn't any of those things. If anything, he was almost too quiet. At first, I barely noticed. But then, things started feeling off. At first, it was harmless. Just little things. Things I told myself weren't a big deal. He never left the room unless he absolutely had to. I'd come back from class and find him in the exact same position, sitting at his desk, staring at his laptop. Not typing, not clicking, just staring. Sometimes the screen was completely black. Then there was the night I woke up late, really late. My throat was dry and I needed water. I rolled over in bed, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. And that's when I saw him. Ethan was awake, or at least he looked like he was. He was sitting at his desk, laptop open in front of him, but he wasn't moving. The glow of the screen should have lit up his face, but it didn't. Because the screen was off. He was just staring, completely still. I whispered, "Hey, you good?" No response. He didn't flinch, didn't react, didn't even blink. I told myself maybe he was half asleep, just zoned out. Maybe I had imagined it. My heart was beating too fast. And I didn't like the way the air felt in the room. Too heavy, too unnatural. I rolled over, squeezed my eyes shut, forced myself to ignore it. But after that night, things got weirder. Every time I left, I'd come back to find my stuff slightly moved. Ethan never had friends over. Never talked about his family. Never mentioned where he was from. One day, I came back early from class and heard my drawers shutting. I stopped outside the door, listening. A few seconds passed. Then the sound stopped. I stepped inside. Ethan was sitting at his desk, laptop open, staring at the screen, like he hadn't moved all day, but my dresser drawer was slightly open, and I knew I had shut it before I left. I should have confronted him. I didn't. I told myself I was overreacting. Then, a few nights later, I woke up again, and this time, I knew for sure he was watching me sleep. I don't know what woke me up. No sounds, no bad dreams, just that strange, unsettling feeling, the kind that makes your skin prickle before your brain even registers why. My body felt tense, my breath too shallow, my heart pounding just a little too fast for no reason at all. Something felt wrong. It was the kind of wrong that doesn't come from a bad dream but from reality itself. The kind that makes your instincts wake up before the rest of you, that tells you someone is there, that you're not alone. I turned over, and there he was. Ethan, sitting upright in his bed, completely still, his eyes locked onto me. A cold, crawling sensation spread through my limbs, the kind of fear that settles into your bones before your mind can process it. My first thought was that he was asleep. People talk about sleep paralysis, right? Maybe this was something like that. Maybe he was having some weird episode, stuck in a half-dream state, unaware of what he was doing. Maybe. But the longer I stared, the clearer it became. His eyes weren't blank. They weren't dazed or unfocused. They were aware, focused, watching. My breath hitched. My body wanted to move, to do something, but I felt frozen under the weight of his gaze. My brain scrambled for logic, for anything that made sense, but all I could do was stare back. Every fiber of my being screamed that this was wrong, that this was something I wasn't supposed to be seeing, that people don't just sit up in the middle of the night to stare at their roommates like that. For a long, stretched-out second, neither of us moved. And then, he did something that sent pure ice through my veins. He smiled. Not a normal smile. Not sleepy, not embarrassed, not groggy. A slow, deliberate grin. Like he was enjoying the moment. Like he had been sitting there, waiting for me to wake up. There was no hesitation in it, no confusion, no shame, just pleasure. He looked like someone savoring something. And the way he held my gaze, the way his lips curled upward just enough to be unnatural, made my entire body lock up with an instinct I couldn't fight off. As in danger, something snapped inside me. I shot up in bed, my voice sharp with panic. "Dude, what the hell are you doing?" The sound of my own voice felt too loud in the silent room, but I didn't care. I needed an answer. I needed this to make sense. Ethan didn't answer. He just kept smiling. For a second, I thought he was going to speak, that his mouth would open and something horrible would come out, something that didn't belong to him. But he didn't. He just sat there, staring at me like he was waiting for something, like he wanted to see how I would react. And then, without a word, he laid back down, turned toward the wall, closed his eyes, like it never happened. I sat there, chest heaving, hands shaking, waiting for something, for him to move again, to explain, to give me any kind of sign that this wasn't as terrifying as it felt. But he just stayed there, silent, still, like he had already forgotten. The room was still, but it didn't feel like the moment was over. It felt like he had taken something from me, some kind of peace I wouldn't get back. I tried to convince myself I had imagined it, that maybe he was messing with me. Maybe I had dreamed the whole thing. But deep down, I knew this wasn't normal, and it was about to get a whole lot worse. After that night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ethan's face. That slow, unnatural grin burned into my memory, frozen in the dark like something I was never supposed to see. Even in daylight, I could still feel it. Like a weight pressing against my chest, a presence that never quite left, always just outside my vision, watching, waiting. It didn't matter if I was in class, at the gym, walking through campus. I felt it, a constant gnawing awareness at the back of my mind, like my life was no longer just my own, like every moment I thought I was alone. I wasn't. I started locking my bedroom door at night, even though it was just a dorm, even though it felt ridiculous. But the lock didn't stop the feeling. It didn't stop the fear. It didn't stop the way my body would jolt awake in the middle of the night, heart pounding, convinced I had just heard something shift in the darkness. It didn't stop the sense that something was terribly, fundamentally wrong. Then, one afternoon, I came back early from class. Ethan wasn't in the room. For the first time in weeks, the dorm was empty. For the first time in weeks, I had the chance to look through his side of the room. I know, I shouldn't have. I told myself I was just checking to see if my stuff had been messed with again, just making sure I wasn't crazy, just confirming that this wasn't all in my head. But my hands were already moving before I had fully decided to do it, already pulling open the top drawer of his desk, already breaking the last thin thread of trust that remained between us. And that's when I found it, a notebook. Not for class, not for notes. The cover was black, unmarked, old. The spine was cracked, the edges frayed, like it had been opened and closed 1,000 times. My fingers hesitated before flipping it open, before peeling back that first page. But the second I saw what was inside, my breath hitched, my stomach dropped. My name, over and over. Page after page after page. Some were scribbled so hard the ink had bled through the paper, like he had written it with force, with fixation, with something that wasn't normal. I could feel it just from looking at it, the pressure behind each stroke, the repeated lines, the deep indentations in the pages, like he had carved my name into them rather than written it. I flipped through faster now, my hands shaking, each new page worse than the last. There were dates, times, little notes. He left at 10:12 a.m. He went to the gym today. He stayed in his room until 2:34 a.m. He doesn't know yet. My skin crawled. This wasn't just weird. This wasn't just paranoia. Ethan was tracking me. Every move, every habit, every detail of my life. I turned to the last page. There was only one sentence, written in perfect, neat handwriting. He's reading this right now. A door creaked behind me. I spun around. Ethan was standing in the doorway, watching me. The notebook was still in my hands, my fingers locked around the edges so tight they ached. My pulse pounded in my ears, my breath coming in shallow bursts. My entire body felt frozen in place, screaming at me to move, to say something, to do anything. But I couldn't. Because Ethan wasn't angry. He wasn't embarrassed. He was smiling. That same slow, unnatural grin, like he had been waiting for this moment. The air in the room felt different now. Thicker, colder, charged with something I couldn't explain. My throat was dry, my voice barely more than a whisper. What the hell is this? Ethan didn't answer right away. He just tilted his head slightly, the way a dog does when it hears a strange sound. The motion was too slow, too deliberate, as if he was studying me, waiting for a reaction that hadn't come yet. I felt my grip on the notebook tighten, the worn pages rough against my fingers, grounding me just enough to remind myself that this was real, that I was awake. Then finally he spoke. You weren't supposed to see that yet. Yet. That word made my stomach drop. It didn't sound like a joke. It didn't sound like he was messing with me. There was no nervous laugh, no attempt to explain, just that same steady voice, calm, certain. A sharp, sick feeling twisted in my gut, crawling up my spine like ice. What did he mean? What was in the notebook that I hadn't seen yet? I forced a shaky laugh, tried to make my voice sound casual, normal, like this wasn't the single most terrifying moment of my life. I needed to break the tension, to make this feel like a misunderstanding, even though I knew deep down that it wasn't. Dude, what the hell does that mean? Ethan didn't blink, didn't stop smiling. His eyes were locked onto mine, unblinking, unshaken, like he was watching something play out exactly as he had expected it to. There was something off about the way he looked at me. Not nervous, not defensive, just waiting. It means you should put it back. The words felt wrong, like they didn't belong in the moment, like we were talking about borrowing a textbook instead of me finding out he had been tracking my every move for months. The air in the room felt colder. The walls felt closer. I could feel something behind me, the sensation of space being occupied where it shouldn't be. I looked down at the notebook again, and that's when I saw it. The very last page wasn't blank. There was one more line written in tiny, neat handwriting, so small I had missed it before. My breath hitched in my throat as I read it. Don't turn around. Every hair on my body stood on end. My fingers went numb. My grip on the notebook felt distant, like it wasn't really mine anymore. My mind screamed, look, see what's there, see what's behind you, but every muscle in my body locked up, refusing to move, trapped between the need to run and the fear of what I might see if I did. Ethan just kept standing there, smiling, like he already knew what I was going to do next. I couldn't move. The words on the page. Don't turn around, Ethan smiled, wide, knowing, patient. Something was wrong. The room felt too small, the air too thick, like the walls were closing in around me. The weight of something unseen pressed against my back, the undeniable, paralyzing sensation that if I moved, if I so much as breathed too hard, something would happen, something I wouldn't be able to undo. The warning in the notebook wasn't a joke. It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't a prank. It was real, and I had ignored it. And then, a breath. Not mine. Not Ethan's. Right behind me. Slow. Deliberate. Like someone was standing inches away. Like something had been waiting for me to read those words, had been waiting for me to understand, had been waiting for me to turn around. My entire body locked up. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to run, to move, to do anything. But I couldn't. The air behind me felt thick, like the space itself had changed, like I wasn't alone anymore, and the cold pressed against the back of my neck, just close enough to feel, but never quite touch. I could hear my own heartbeat slamming against my ribs, feel the way my lungs refused to pull in enough air. But none of it mattered, because the only thing that mattered was the presence behind me, the presence that shouldn't be there. And Ethan, he just stood in the doorway, watching, like he was waiting to see what I'd do next. I don't know how long I sat there, frozen. Seconds, minutes. Time didn't feel real anymore. The weight of the room, the suffocating stillness, the unnatural quiet, it felt endless. But I knew I couldn't stay like this forever. I knew that whatever was behind me wouldn't wait forever. It was waiting for something. Waiting for me. And then, in the worst mistake of my life, I turned around. The room was empty. No one was there. The breath was gone. The pressure was gone. The air felt normal again. Everything was normal. But the second I turned back to Ethan, I knew something wasn't right. His expression had changed. The way he stood had changed. The way he was looking at me had changed. Because his smile was gone. He wasn't watching me anymore. He was staring at the spot where I had just been sitting. And his face, for the first time since I met him, he looked scared. His hands trembled at his sides. His body stiffened like he was holding his breath. His lips parted slightly like he wanted to say something but couldn't. I had seen Ethan smile at things that should have terrified him. I had seen him laugh at moments that should have made him uncomfortable. But now, for the first time, he was afraid. Then, in a voice so quiet I barely heard it, he whispered, "You weren't supposed to look," and then he ran. Ethan left the dorm that night. He never came back. No calls, no emails, no trace of him anywhere. The school never found out where he went. It was like he just disappeared. He had been there one moment and gone the next, and no one had answers. No one seemed to care. But I cared, because I knew whatever had happened to him, whatever had made him run, was my fault. I moved out the next morning. I didn't ask questions. I didn't try to find him. I didn't talk about what happened, didn't bring it up to anyone, didn't try to make sense of it. Because what was I supposed to say? That my roommate was tracking me? That I found his notebook? That something had breathed behind me in an empty room? That he had left because I turned around? But sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone in my new apartment, I swear I can still hear it. That slow, deliberate breath, right behind me,